This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for October 30th through November 5th. On this week's show, we discuss how a group received credit for a song they didn't sing, how wanting to change your image can sometimes also be a cautionary tale, and we wish happy birthday to 4 people who have birthdays on Halloween. Fakeness. It's all the rage these days. There's fake news, or as it used to be called, propaganda or misinformation. There are people who Photoshop their photos or use AI or get surgery in order to give themselves curves, bigger lips, whatever. In music, fakeness is running rampant. For example, there's auto-tuning, which helps people who can't sing actually sound like they can. There's Iggy Azalea, who fakes a southern hip-hop drawl even though she has a thick Australian accent and is from Australia. We can discuss appropriating black culture, but that's for a whole other podcast. In her defense, though, is there really a difference between what she did with the accent and actors who fake accents for movie roles? Probably not. So, maybe not. Who knows? This whole thing with fakeness in music is nothing new, however. Back in the years 1989 to 1991, there was a whole lot of fakeness in dance music especially. You no doubt by now know the story of Milli Vanilli, whose name is now synonymous with fakeness. However, singer Marsha Walsh was a victim of fakeness as well due to her weight. CNC Music Factory replaced her in the video for the song Gonna Make You Sweat with a skinnier singer. The group Black Box did the same thing to her on their song Strike It Up, and also a couple other songs that she did. Even back in the 1960s, there was fakeness going on. In the early goings of the Monkees television show, the group didn't play their own instruments. They were actors, after all. They learned, though, as time went on. But then, there was the case of this next story. In 1961, the Crystals were signed to Phillies Records. Phillies was controlled by legendary producer and soon-to-be prison inmate who passed away in 2020 during the COVID outbreak in prison, Mr. Phil Spector. Phil produced their first few hits, most of which went to number 1. At the same time, there was another group that Phil produced called the Blossoms. They weren't as famous as the Crystals. Their lead singer was Darlene Love, who would later go on to have hits of her own and gain additional fame for playing Danny Glover's wife in the Lethal Weapon movies. There was a song that Gene Pitney had penned called He's a Rebel that was making the rounds. Singer Vicky Carr was in the process of recording it, and Spector wanted to beat her to the punch. As it happened, the Crystals were based in New York City, while Phil and the Blossoms were based in Los Angeles. The Crystals couldn't get to Los Angeles fast enough for Phil, and the Blossoms weren't famous enough to carry the record up the charts, so Phil did what any producer would do at that time. He got the Blossoms to sing the song. However, because they weren't well known yet, he released the song as The Crystals, denying the Blossoms a number 1 hit on November 2nd, 1963, even though the Blossoms were the ones who sang the song. He did that to one more of their songs, He's Sure the Boy I Love, which went to number 11. And then Spector went back to recording and releasing songs with the Crystals. So, when you hear the song He's a Rebel next time, remember that who they say it is isn't really who it is. He's a Rebel, credited to the Crystals, but really sung by the Blossoms with Darlene Love as the lead singer. That hit number 1 on Billboard Singles Chart on November 2nd, 1963. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. This next story is about a man who wanted an image change. It's also sort of a cautionary tale about being careful about what you wish for. In the first half of the 1980s, George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley, as part of the group Wham, were one of the biggest groups out there. From 1981 to 1986, they even gave Michael Jackson a run for his money in terms of albums sold. Something was bothering George, though. Even though Wham had serious adult songs like Careless Whisper, they still were considered a silly teeny bopper band. I guess when you have songs like Wake Me Up Before You Go on your resume, the teeny bopper label's going to stick no matter what you do. At the end of 1986, Wham decided that it was time to break up and do other things. So George was at a crossroads. He wanted to move on to other things, but to also change his image. The first thing he did was to record a song with Aretha Franklin called I Knew You Were Waiting, which became a huge hit. Then he went to work on a solo album. George produced the album and wrote every song on the album except for Look at Your Hands, which he co-wrote with David Austin. George also played percussion, bass guitar, and keyboards on the album. In total, there were 21 different musicians on the various tracks, including a complete horn section and his trusty bassist Dion Estes, who had a hit song of his own a couple years later. The album was recorded between August 1986 to September 1987 in Denmark and London, mainly London. Along with George being the producer, Chris Porter was the engineer, Paul Gummersall and Paul Wright were the assistant engineers, Steve Peck was the remix engineer, and 1980s go-to remixer Shep Pettibone did remix production, especially on the song Hard Day. He released the first single for the album, I Want Your Sex, 4 months before the album, June 1st, 1987 to be precise, because the song was also on the soundtrack for that summer's movie blockbuster Beverly Hills Cop 2 starring Eddie Murphy. The radio edit and the version most people are familiar with is part 1 of the song, while the album version has parts 1 and 2. Part 2 is the louder part with a horn section in it. The song was controversial due to its subject matter. The song is called I Want Your Sex. Even the music video for the song was controversial for, among other things, having a woman in lingerie in it. In fact, the music video ranks at number 3 on MTV's most controversial music videos ever aired list. For George's part, after he put out the song, he really didn't perform it. It was almost as if he was embarrassed for having done the song and the music video to begin with. Finally, on October 30th, 1987, November 2nd in the UK, his album Faith came out. By that point, he had released the title track from the album Faith on October 2nd, 1987. The song had an organ version of his Wham hit Freedom in the beginning of it. It also had the now iconic music video of him wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses while leaning up against a jukebox and playing guitar. That song was already a big hit when the album came out, so the album already had a good bit of headwind to it. The song Faith went to number 1 on the Billboard Singles Chart. On the same day that the album came out in America, George released his third single, Hard Day. He eventually released 4 other singles from the album. Father Figure on December 28, 1987, One More Try on April 11, 1988, Monkey on July 4, 1988, and Kissing a Fool on November 21, 1988. The other unreleased songs on the original LP version of the album were Look at Your Hands and Hand to Mouth. The CD version had 2 extra songs on it, the Shep Pettibone remix of Hard Day, along with a slow, chill jazz lounge version of I Want Your Sex, titled A Last Request. The album Faith went to number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart and stayed at the top of the charts for 12 non-consecutive weeks. It stayed on the Billboard Top 10 Albums chart for 51 non-consecutive weeks. His songs Faith, Father Figure, One More Try, and the remix version of Monkey, which was remixed by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, all went to number one, making George the first British male solo artist to have 4 number one singles from the same album in America, and one of only 3 artists in the 1980s to have at least 4 consecutive number one singles. Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston were the other 2 artists. When the album came out, it was surprisingly loved by the same critics who had dismissed Wham as a kids' duo. Eventually, the album Faith sold over 25 million copies worldwide and won a ton of awards, including the Grammy Award for Album of the Year and 3 American Music Awards. Rolling Stone has it at number 151, up from number 480 in an earlier edition of the Top 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list. It was at 151 as of the 2020 edition. George also went on a world tour to support the album throughout 1988, where he played Asia, Europe, and America. Yet, after all of that, after successfully changing his image from the teeny bopper Wham days to the sex symbol of his solo album, something happened. George hated his new image. In fact, for his next album, Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1, he made 2 videos, neither of which he appeared in. He addressed his new image in the song Freedom 90. In the music video for that song, it featured supermodels and also a slow-motion shot of his leather jacket, guitar, and jukebox from the Faith music video going up in flames and exploding. As some of the lyrics of the song Freedom 90 said, quote, "When I knew what side my bread was buttered, and I took the knife as well. But when you shake your ass, they notice fast, and some mistakes were built to last." End quote. While George had other hits, he basically ran away from fame for a good long time. He would show up every once in a while to give out an award, including one time when he gave an award to a very surprised Adele, who idolized George. He also showed up on the very first Carpool Karaoke with James Corden when the sketch was originally done for a British charity TV show. And he would go back out on tour, but it wasn't a huge tour like it was before. It was spot dates here and there, usually with a small orchestra and a bunch of backup singers as well. The rest of George's career was plagued with run-ins with the law, fights with his record company where he couldn't record for a number of years, and very serious health concerns that eventually ended up claiming his life way too early at the age of 53 on Christmas Day 2016. Still, what a voice, what a personality. I miss him to this day. George Michael's mega popular album Faith, released in America on October 30th, 1987. Since this is the week of Halloween, here are 4 people who have made their mark on music and who each celebrate a birthday on Halloween. First, Larry Mullen Jr. was born in Dublin, Ireland on October 31st, 1961. One day in 1976, his father suggested that he put an ad on the Mount Temple Comprehensive School bulletin board that read, quote, "Drummer seeks musicians to form band," end quote. Among the guys who answered that ad were Paul Bono Hewson, David the Edge Evans, and Adam Clayton. No nickname, ever. Go figure. After a few name changes, including using the name Feedback, The Hype, and switching out some members, the band settled on the name U2. The band released their first album, Boy, in 1980. That album had the hit I Will Follow. Their second album, October, was released in 1981. At this point in America, a couple things happened. The first was that they started getting a reputation for energetic concerts, which led to them getting played on college radio. The second was that their music video for the song Gloria got played on some new TV channel called MTV, right when MTV was beginning to affect record sales. And although the band wasn't thrilled with the October album because their original ideas were lost in a briefcase during a show to support the Boy album, which meant they had to rush the recording process during October's album, U2 was hell-bent on getting their very next album right. That album was called War, which also happens to be my all-time favorite U2 album. Released in 1982, the group started to flex its social and political muscles with the songs Sunday Bloody Sunday and New Year's Day. At this point, they also started playing bigger stadiums and festivals, including memorable concerts at the US Festival, where Bono climbed onto the top of the stage rigging, and the Red Rocks Amphitheater concert, which was turned into their live EP, Under a Blood Red Sky. In 1984, U2 released The Unforgettable Fire, which had the hit Pride in the Name of Love. By now, U2 was transitioning from college rock band to a stadium act. In 1985, they played Live Aid, where they did a 12-minute version of their song Bad, during which Bono danced with a member of the audience. It, along with Queen, became the two most memorable concerts during that particular event. Album number 5 was when they hit superstar status. The album The Joshua Tree began their experimentation with American blues, gospel, and folk. The album contained hits I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, With or Without You, Where the Streets Have No Name, and Bullet the Blue Sky. The album won them a number of Grammy Awards. They followed that album up with the album and concert movie Rattle and Hum. Driven by the song Desire, the album sold 14 million copies worldwide. In 1991, after taking some time off away from each other due to band tensions and just being around each other for a better part of a decade, U2 went electronica for their next album, Achtung Baby. That album had The Fly, Zoo Station, Mysterious Ways, and One. The album won them a lot of awards, including a Grammy Award, and spawned a huge tour, the Zoo TV Tour, during which Bono came out on stage as various characters. Their next album, Zootopia, continued the electronica trend. They also did a song for the Batman Forever soundtrack called Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, then did an experimental album with Brian Eno called Original Soundtracks 1, which is actually really good. You should search that one out. Great album. Their next album, Pop, was, by their own admission, one of the worst albums they ever made. I would agree with that, although there were a couple of good songs on it. I did like Discotheque. That was a good tune. The boys came back strong, though, with All That You Can't Leave Behind with Beautiful Day and Elevation, which was on the Tomb Raider soundtrack, the Angelina Jolie version of that movie, actually. During the tour to support the album, the September 11th attacks happened. The group played a concert at Madison Square Garden in New York City in October and followed that up with a halftime show at the Super Bowl, where the names of the victims of the attack were scrolled down on a video screen. After that, U2 released How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. That album took home 8 Grammy Awards. After that came the albums No Line on the Horizon, Songs of Innocence, and Songs of Experience, which had to be delayed by a year while they rewrote the album to fit the new nationalistic world. While there were no hit songs from the album, the group still is a huge concert draw, playing multiple sold-out shows worldwide, including doing a residency at the Sphere in Las Vegas in the past year or so. U2 has sold more than 170 million albums and has won the most Grammy Awards of any band. Currently, that number is 22. Yes, they've even beaten out the Beatles. So, Happy birthday to a member of one of my all-time favorite groups, U2, and the drummer Larry Mullen Jr., born October 31st, 1961. This next person is a bass player, but not just any bass player. He helped to influence a whole generation of bass players, including John Taylor of Duran Duran, along with more than a few songs like Rapper's Delight and Another One Bites the Dust. Even if you don't know his band Chic with Nile Rodgers, you know his bass line from his song Good Times. In fact, now that I've said the title to the song, you're probably humming it right now in your head without even knowing it. Good times, these are the good... See? Now it's stuck in your head. You're welcome. Nile Rodgers was born in 1952 in New York City. In 1970, both he and bassist Bernard Edwards, who was born in 1952 on October 31st, no less, formed two bands. The first one was called The Boys. The second one was called the Big Apple Band, after the two of them had met while making the rounds in New York City as session musicians. The guys wanted to change their name from the Big Apple Band to Chic after Walter Murphy and the Big Apple Band became famous with their disco hit, A Fifth of Beethoven, which ended up on the Saturday Night's Fever soundtrack and went to almost to the top of the charts, went top 10 if memory serves. So the guys decided they needed to change their name from Big Apple Band to Chic. They then recruited drummer Tony Thompson, who would later play in the band The Power Station with John and Andy Taylor of Duran Duran, and Robert Palmer, who had a pretty successful career of his own. After they got Tony Thompson, they got keyboardist Raymond Jones and singer Norma Jean Wright. The band's debut album in 1977 came out at the perfect time as disco was just beginning to hit its peak and before disco demolition happened. The album also had the disco hits Dance, 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 Yowza, 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 and Everybody Dance. Due to a solo career contract that Wright had with another record label, she had to leave the band and was replaced by Alpha Anderson. During this time, Nile and Bernard also produced the hit single from Sister Sledge, He's the Greatest Dancer, which went on to be sampled by Will Smith for his hit Gettin' Jiggy With It. 1978's album C'est Chic had the hit song that inspired the dance craze Le Freak, which was originally a diss track against Studio 54, the famous disco nightclub, which would not let the group in on New Year's Eve 1977 in order to meet singer Grace Jones, who was inside and who had invited the group. The album also had the song I Want Your Love, which was originally written for Sister Sledge, but the group traded singles with them and let them record He's the Greatest Dancer instead. 1979's album Risque had the classic song Good Times, whose bass line inspired artists like Duran Duran's John Taylor to play bass guitar, inspired songs like Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, and was ripped off / sampled extremely heavily for the groundbreaking hip-hop single Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. Once Chic broke up the first time in the early 1980s, Rodgers went on to write songs for such artists as Sister Sledge and Diana Ross. He also helped produce songs like INXS's Original Sin, Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out, David Bowie's Let's Dance, and Madonna's Like a Virgin. Tony Thompson went on to play in the Power Station before passing away from kidney cancer. Bernard Edwards passed away in Tokyo, Japan from pneumonia after playing a gig with a reunited Chic. Happy heavenly birthday to the late great bassist Bernard Edwards, born October 31st, 1952. Hip-hop plays a part in the next two people's lives. First off, Adam Ad Rock Horowitz was a boy from Manhattan who played punk rock music as a kid. When guitarist John Barry quit a different punk rock band called the Young Aborigines, Adams joined that band. As time went on, his new band changed its sound from punk to a new form of music at the time called hip-hop, then called rap music. They originally had 3 guys, Adam, Mike D. Diamond, and Adam MCA Youch, and a girl. But the girl, Kate Schellenbach, left the group and is now the drummer for the group Luscious Jackson, who had a major hit of their own called Naked Eye. I digress, though. The rest of this hip-hop band went on to have a massive career and are now members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The band, of course, is the Beastie Boys. The Beasties experimented with hip-hop and put out an EP called Cookie Puss, whose title track was the group pranking a Carvel ice cream store by prank calling them. Listen, you gotta get your entertainment from somewhere. Why not there? Why not? Because Cookie Puss did so well, the band decided to go into hip-hop full-time, which is what led to Kate leaving the group to begin with. The group hired a DJ for their shows named Rick Rubin, who went to New York University. Rick decided to go into producing and got another friend from NYU named Russell Simmons to form a record label with him. They called the record label Def Jam Records. When that was formed, the first group Rick wanted on it were the Beasties. The group recorded their debut album, which they were going to call something with a homophobic name, but that idea was blissfully killed. The group also did something that at that time was not too popular. Usually an artist will put out 1, possibly 2 lead singles from an album before releasing the entire thing. The Beasties released 3. They started off with Hold It Now in April 1986 and then released Paul Revere. A week before they released their album, now called License to Ill, they released The New Style. 1 month after that, the group released the song and the music video that would break things wide open for them. You Gotta Fight for Your Right to Party. Once that song came out and the music video made heavy rotation on MTV, it was off to the races. The group also released Brass Monkey, Girls, and No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which featured a guitar solo from Kerry King from Slayer, who Rick was producing at the same time he was producing the Beasties. The album License to Ill became one of the fastest-selling albums of all time, eventually selling over 10 million certified copies in America alone. The importance of the album to hip-hop cannot be understated. It became the first hip-hop album to hit #1 on Billboard's albums chart. It also helped to get hip-hop played on MTV, which was finally warming up to the idea that hip-hop was not a fad at that point. The Beasties, along with Run DMC, not much later, made hip-hop cool for suburban kids to listen to. Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer, a few years later, would water down hip-hop enough, for better or for worse, probably for worse, so that it would be cool for suburban mothers to listen to it, thus completing hip-hop's rise in pop culture to accepted status. After that album came classics like Paul's Boutique, Ill Communication, Hello Nasty, Check Your Head, and To the Five Boroughs, with songs like So What You Want, Sabotage, Intergalactic, Brass Monkey, Paul Revere, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, You Gotta Fight for Your Right to Party, and the list goes on and on. On the night of the group's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1 member was missing, Adam MCA Youch. Unbeknownst to the general public, MCA was in the final stages of cancer on that date. He passed away less than a week after the ceremony. Adam Horowitz, better known as King Ad Rock, born on October 31st, 1966. This last man started out hot, became the brunt of a lot of jokes, and I've already mentioned his name. But he invested his money wisely, unlike a lot of his peers, and then became the host of a TV fixer-upper show. He claimed on record and in interviews that he grew up on the streets, but he really grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, and his parents had a lot of money. He had one of the biggest selling hip-hop albums of all time, and like it or not, was actually, along with MC Hammer, one of those guys responsible for rap going completely mainstream, having watered it down so much that even your grandmother liked it. It is his song Ice Ice Baby that is actually the first rap song to hit #1 on the Billboard singles chart. Not Run DMC, not LL Cool J. He was also sued by Queen and David Bowie for that song, sampling their song Under Pressure without their permission. Always get permission first. Over the years, he's had run-ins with Suge Knight, suffered from depression, been the brunt of a very funny bit that was done by Jim Carrey on the TV show In Living Color, and reinvented himself into a do-it-yourself workman on the DIY network. Just to show that he now has a sense of humor about his time in the 90s spotlight, he posted the Jim Carrey clip making fun of him on his official Vanilla Ice YouTube page. At least he can take a joke. A big happy birthday to Robert Matthew Van Winkle, otherwise known as Vanilla Ice, born on October 31st, 1967. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for October 30th through November 5th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify.